back for 30 minutes. I am going to be playing this channel called Bullets and Blockbusters. It's called Bullets. That's it. It's called Bullets and Blockbusters. Basically, this guy, he does a great job, by the way. He talks about what ifs. Like, he does his research on movies that would have been. He talks about rewrites. If the movie would have went in this direction with this writer or this director, what it would have looked like instead of what we got in a lot of scenarios. I'm just let you guys see what I'm talking about. Right here, it's talking about what could have been Joel Schumacher's Batman Unchained. I'm gonna let you guys. I think I didn't say his name right, but y'all get it once I start playing.
What if Joel Schumacher directed a third Batman film? Well, he almost did.
The studio wanted me to do a fifth Batman, which would have been my third, which would have featured the Scarecrow.
Not only was the script written, but the movie was being cast too, with Jack Nicholson even returning as the Joker. And despite Batman and Robin's campiness, this film would have returned to a much more serious tone, with Schumacher looking to tie up all of the films, including Tim Burton's, and bring the Batman saga full circle. So let's dive in and find out what went wrong and what could have been Batman Unchained. After Batman Returns disappointed at the box office and was deemed too dark by parents.
Some parents contend that Batman Returns, which is rated PG-13, is actually being marketed for younger children, and the movie is just too violent.
Joel Schumacher was brought in to take over from Tim Burton and lighten the tone of the series, so that the film would appeal to a wider, more family-friendly audience, and thus make more money.
For a take, Joel would pick up his megaphone, his bullhorn, and go, "Remember, everybody, it's a cartoon."
And it worked, as Batman Forever outgrossed its predecessor and was devoid of any of the controversy that plagued Batman Returns. Warner Brothers, relieved that they had righted the ship, quickly greenlit a sequel and rushed it into production, hoping to milk this cash cow for all it was worth.
In Batman and Robin, there was a real desire at the studio to keep it more family-friendly, more kid-friendly. And a word I'd never heard before, more toyetic, which means that what you create makes toys that can sell.
With the first Batman film, Warner Brothers realized the immense power of merchandising, as they made more from t-shirts, toys, and merchandise than from the film's box office.
Not only will kids need movie tickets, they'll need extra money for Batman gear, from t-shirts to underwear.
Therefore, on the sequels, a greater emphasis was placed on writing stories that incorporated an abundance of gadgets, costumes, and vehicles that could be turned into toys, which is why in both of Schumacher's Batman films, he does a third-act costume change.
First one, I felt like I was making a movie. The second one, I felt like I was making a toy commercial.
And in a way, he was, as the movies were basically acting as 2-hour advertisements to sell merchandise.
We involved the toy company. We let them look and be involved in how the Batmobile was going to look, how Batman's gadgets were going to be.
Before Batman and Robin was even finished, the studio was looking to make another one, impressed by the footage being shot. Schumacher, realizing with Batman and Robin that the franchise was starting to spin out of control, also worried that he was disappointing a lot of the older fans by making his Batman films too family-friendly, and felt he owed the hardcore fans the Batman movie he would love to give them. As a result, for the fifth film, he had an idea that was not only darker and less campy, but would also wrap up the series. Schumacher envisioned a psychologically complex take.
Y'all see what I'm talking about? It's actually pretty interesting, if you ask me.
The character,
I like
something he wanted to explore on both Batman Forever and Batman and Robin before getting pushed back from.
It's not so much of a. Well, it is a what if. It does fit under that category. But there's a lot of technical stuff. We might go with this. We didn't like this script, so we're gonna go with this instead. What could be's? What could have beens? What could have beens? I like what could. This is more like what could have beens as opposed to what ifs. You know what I'm saying? It's both, actually. I should say it's both. But if the right, they're not always good ideas too. But what could have beens aren't always good ideas. But there's been a lot that I've seen from this Bullets and Blockbusters, and I'm like, damn. I've seen a lot of videos, and I'm like, damn, why didn't they go with that idea? But I digress. Let's get to it.
Studio and ultimately settling for making the lighter films we got. Writer Akiva Goldsman, who worked on the previous two Batman films, turned down the chance to return. So Schumacher turned to Mark Protosevich, who had recently written a draft of I Am Legend. After he met with Schumacher, who pitched his vision for pushing the franchise in a more serious direction, Protosevich locked himself away to slave over the script. Titled Batman Unchained, although often incorrectly referred to by fans online as Batman Triumphant, the script dealt with Batman learning to conquer fear while confronting the demons of his past. So who would have been the villains? Well, we almost got a glimpse of one of them in Batman and Robin, as Schumacher envisioned a cameo appearance to set them up for Batman Unchained. And this villain would have been Scarecrow, to be played by Nicolas Cage, whose sometimes unhinged performances would seem to make him a perfect villain for a Batman villain. Schumacher even went so far as to meet with Cage on the Face-Off set to ask him to briefly appear in Batman and Robin, which obviously never happened. It's rumored that this part played by Coolio would have been that cameo. Joining Scarecrow as the film's secondary villain would have been Harley Quinn, whose character would have been changed significantly for the film. Instead of being the Joker's lover, she would have been his daughter, and it's something she would have discovered early in the film, as it would have been a secret kept from her throughout her life. And while she's depicted as a psychologist in the comics, this version of the character would have been reimagined as a toy maker. Protosevich says he wrote Harley as sadistic in a mischievous, fun sense, while being good-hearted and conflicted. Harley's casting, however, was never firmed up like Nick Cage's Scarecrow, although Protosevich did meet singer-turned-actress Courtney Love, then coming off a Golden Globe nomination for her role in The People vs. Larry Flint. Also heavily rumored to be attached to the role, which would have fit Warner Brothers' penchant for casting big names, was Madonna, although it's alleged she demanded too much money. Interestingly, each of the film's two villains would have been out for revenge, albeit against different sides of Bruce's dual identity. The brilliant and apparently satanic Professor Crane would have had a personal vendetta against Bruce Wayne, while Harley Quinn would have been out for revenge against Batman for killing her father. Eventually, upon realizing they have a common enemy who happens to be the same person, Harley and Scarecrow would have teamed up with the goal of driving Bruce insane to get him committed to Arkham Asylum. To do this, Scarecrow develops a fear toxin, which he uses on Batman, resulting in an ambitious, all-star cameo-filled sequence, which would have seen a hallucinating Batman face the demons of his past, where he is literally put on trial by the franchise's previous villains. Danny DeVito's Penguin, Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, Tommy Lee Jones's Two-Face, and Jim Carrey's Riddler all would have shown up, culminating in a final confrontation with the clown Prince of Crime, Jack Nicholson's Joker. Fear and guilt would have been the primary themes in the film, with Batman having to finally face the consequences of his past actions, particularly regarding the death of Napier and its impact on his daughter, Harley Quinn, which he would feel enormous guilt over. Schumacher's goal was to tie up all of the films, including Tim Burton's, building up to this moment. However, I'm curious how this would have played out, considering all of the villains that would have appeared in this hallucination were antagonists of both Keaton and Kilmer, and never met or interacted with Clooney's Batman, who would have returned to play the Cape Crusader. I can't imagine George Clooney coming face-to-face with Nicholson's Joker would have had the effect Schumacher was looking for, which frankly only would have worked if Bruce was played by Keaton. And while I appreciate that Schumacher wanted to bridge and tie up all of the Batman films, it always felt like his Batman films were a soft reboot and didn't really take place in the same timeline or universe as Burton's films. Spoiler alert, but this was further reinforced with both Keaton and Clooney appearing separately in The Flash. Chris O'Donnell's Robin would have returned as well, but Alicia Silverstone's Batgirl was not in the script, with her character being written out, having gone back to college. And while Batman and Robin's antagonistic relationship was explored in Batman and Robin, it would have reached a boiling point in Batman Unchained, as we would have seen the Boy Wonder end their partnership at one point in the film before returning during the final battle to help his mentor.
Yeah, I didn't particularly care for George Clooney's Batman.
Bruce's fear of
When I
bats
was a
would be
kid,
explored as well,
ate it
but
up.
haunted
Now,
him
I'm
in
like,
his
wow.
hallucinations. After defeating the bad guys and his
Eating it up when I was a kid. Now I'm just like, oh my god. That was the absolute worst Batman movie I've ever seen. With George Clooney, and it was bad. Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze and Uma Thurman is, it was terrible. It was terrible.
demons begins, Bruce would have traveled to Bali, where Protosevich read in real life monks enter a cave full of bats to show they have conquered fear. The film would have ended with Bruce entering the cave as bats swarm him, demonstrating that he had conquered his fears following his battle with Scarecrow. So what went wrong? Well, as Protosevich was finishing up his first draft, Batman and Robin hit theaters.
Boy, was I shocked by the new Batman movie. It's so overproduced.
I didn't like it either, Jane, although I guess I liked it a little more than you did. I would give it 2 stars. How many?
That's exactly what I'm giving it.
Okay, fine.
Not only was it critically panned, but it failed to outgross any of its predecessors at the box office, with many wondering if it would have performed better had it not been rushed to theaters so soon after Batman Forever, a mistake they were on the verge of making again.
To start one up as soon as we did was really soon, I thought. And I think that, ultimately the movie suffered because I think, number one, I don't think people were ready for it. And there's something about these things being away for a certain amount of time where people's interest kind of starts to percolate a little bit.
Shortly after the film came out, Schumacher asked to see the script, which at the time was an unpolished 150-page first draft. After reading it, Schumacher's main comment was that Protosevich had written maybe the most expensive movie ever made. And with that, a fifth Batman film was placed in limbo as Warner Brothers debated how to proceed. Schumacher, however, was still eager to do one more and would claim that he came up with an idea that would be far less expensive while pleasing hardcore fans.
Long ago, when this whole thing started, Batman Year One, the Frank Miller comic, was always my favorite. And I was always hoping that I would do that one.
Schumacher was originally hired to rescue the franchise after Warner Brothers felt Tim Burton had fumbled the bag with Batman Returns. And while Schumacher achieved initial success with Batman Forever, ironically, he would end up leaving the franchise in a worse place than how he found it.
Are the nipples still there?
Of course, it's a Joel Schumacher film. Everybody has nipples.
As Batman and Robin is widely regarded as one of the worst superhero films ever made. However, its impact is undeniable, as Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige would call it maybe the most important comic book film ever made, and that it was so bad that it demanded a new way of doing things and paved the way for adaptations like Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man that took themselves more seriously and showed greater respect for their source material. It's also interesting how some of these ideas in Protosevich's script ended up in Batman Begins several years later. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.
So you want to play Dungeons and Dragons, but you absolutely have no idea how to
Pretty
start.
good, right?
And the 300.
Let's listen to, since we watched Batman, let's go to another one.
What if instead of playing the Joker, Joaquin Phoenix played Batman? Well, he almost did, in director Darren Aronofsky's Batman Year One, which would have diverged significantly from the source material and promised to be the darkest and most violent
Also,
Batman
this
film
channel
ever
is called
made.
Bullets
So let's dive in
and
and find out
Blockbusters.
why it never happened and also what could have been. Darren Aronofsky's
This, like I said, this channel is called Bullets and Blockbusters.
Batman Year One. Following Batman Returns, which was criticized for being too dark and disturbing for children, Warner Brothers chose to part ways with Tim Burton. To replace him, they hired Joel Schumacher to lighten the tone of the franchise. However, Schumacher originally had other plans and fought to make a prequel, adapting Frank Miller's comic book, Batman Year One, which would have still featured Michael Keaton's Batman and explored how Bruce Wayne became the Dark Knight. Warner Brothers was adamant that they wanted a sequel, not a prequel. As a result, Schumacher compromised and included some flashbacks to Bruce's past and what would become Batman Forever. Following the critical and commercial failure of Schumacher's follow-up film, Batman and Robin, the director felt he owed Batman fans a real Batman movie and wanted to make up for Batman and Robin by going back to basics and making a dark portrayal of the Dark Knight, again pushing to adapt Year One. Warner Brothers, on the other hand, felt it was essential to wipe the slate clean after the failure of Batman and Robin and wanted to reboot the franchise with a new creative voice, seeking a bold new direction to redefine Batman for modern audiences. As a result, they moved forward with 2 projects and greenlight whichever one they liked best. The first would be an adaptation of the animated series Batman Beyond, set in the future and featuring an older, retired Batman mentoring a young crime fighter.
Y'all know how much-
Director of Remember the Titans,
How cool
was
it would be
brought
if
in
we
to help
actually
the project,
got a
and he worked
Batman
on a script
Beyond.
with the creators of the show. Imagining
I don't think they got the
futuristic
balls to make it.
Blade Runner-inspired Gotham.
None of them.
Clint Eastwood, whom the director worked with on The Rookie,
Because
as
it
the
moves
old
away
Bruce
from-
Wayne. However, the studio balked at his
It moves away
darker
from
and nihilistic take
Bruce
on the
Wayne,
material,
you know?
complete with swearing and
Being
violence.
the guy.
As a result, they went forward with developing their other idea, a complete reboot telling the story of Batman's origins. To direct it, they turned to indie filmmaker Darren Aronofsky, who at the time had only made Pi and had yet to be released Requiem for a Dream. Aronofsky Aronofsky pitched a gritty, street-level reimagining of Batman that brought the character back to a raw, realistic setting. He wanted to shoot in real locations in inner cities across America, avoiding sound stages or sets to create an authentic, grounded atmosphere. His approach combined elements of Death Wish and The French Connection, portraying Gordon as a whistleblowing cop inspired by Serpico, and Batman as a damaged vigilante reminiscent of Travis Bickle. The goal was to explore what it would truly take for an ordinary man to don a costume and fight crime, injecting the franchise with a stark sense of realism. To help him write it, he turned to Frank Miller, writer of Year One, who would say, "It was the first time I worked on a Batman project with somebody whose vision of Batman was darker than mine. My Batman was too nice for him. We would argue about it, and I'd say, Batman wouldn't do that. He wouldn't torture anybody," and so on. Miller and Aronofsky's script ended up being a loose adaptation of Miller's comic.
Should I be focusing on this? It looks like your SRS airbag light is on. It's best to get that checked out by a mechanic as soon as possible to make sure your airbags will work properly if you need them.
Is that ass?
You know when you try to click skip ad, but just don't do it in time.
Aronofsky would change several key elements synonymous with the character. For starters, Alfred is absent from the story. Instead, Bruce is taken in off the streets by Little Al.
Get my heart rate going still. You know what as far as all this comic book nerd shit and Batman is concerned, I am so glad that we got a Christopher Nolan Batman. I am so glad that man was able to just jump into that story as a director with his brother helping write the trilogy. The fact that we got a Batman, his trilogy, just, I don't know. I feel like as far as, excluding Adam West and, obviously, creator Kane, I think that's what his name is. I forgot what his name is. But, is that what his name is? I don't wanna mess up his name, man. But, excluding from, Kane, Bob Kane. Okay, I was right. Excluding Bob Kane, obviously who made Batman, created Batman, and Adam West's Batman, and Michael Keaton. I think after that, Christopher Nolan's Batman was probably the most essential Batman to hit screens, man. To just enter the zeitgeist. He was absolutely the most essential Batman. I mean, that trilogy was so good. People's biggest complaint about that movie or that trilogy is that it was too realistic. I'm like, I love that. I love the movie. I love that trilogy because it was realistic, or at least it tried to take as realistic of an approach as it possibly could with dealing with Batman, because he's not a superhuman. He's not a meta-human. He's just a rich billionaire in a suit. You know what I'm saying?
An African-American mechanic
I know what I'm
who's
trying
his
to say.
mentor. Little Al provides Bruce
And then,
with shelter in the apartment.
shout out
of
to
his own
Patterson's
but
Batman,
Bruce
too.
Wilson lives a modest, isolated life,
I love the
disconnected from the wealth and privilege of his family name. In the script, Bruce is presumed dead by Gotham's elite. The screenplay hints that the Wayne Corporation has been searching for its missing heir, with his inheritance hanging in legal limbo. This radical reimagining grounds Batman's early days as a vigilante, stripping away his fortune and limited resources. Bruce becomes a highly skilled mechanic while working at Little Al's auto shop, and with Al's help, he builds a rudimentary Batmobile. The vehicle is a heavily modified Lincoln Continental with blacked-out windows and powered by a school bus engine. It's a far cry from the high-tech Batmobiles of other adaptations, and its aesthetic and practicality bear resemblance to the muscle car-inspired vehicle driven by Robert Pattinson's Batman in The Batman. Bruce also doesn't train with figures like Ra's al Ghul to learn how to fight. Instead, he teaches himself through intense self-study, reading books and manuals on combat techniques to develop his skills. His fighting style is raw and unrefined, formed from theory and real-world application during his early attempts at vigilante justice. Below Little Al's garage is an underground, abandoned trainer area. Tracks running under and connecting to the entire city, which Bruce uses as his Batcave rather than a traditional cave or Wayne Manor. Unlike other interpretations of Gordon, who are often shown as steadfast and in control, this version depicts him as a nearly broken man, introduced sitting on a toilet with a gun in his mouth and committing suicide. A mere detective in this this version, Gordon's despair stems from him feeling powerless in the face of Gotham's corruption, which has left him disillusioned. However, his wife's pregnancy gives him a new sense of purpose. After refusing to participate in Gordon's bribery, he is severely viewed by fellow officers as a warning to back down. Yet Gordon persists, promising to wage a one-man war on crime and corruption, making him a local hero, and even showing Bruce that one man's determination can make a difference, inspiring Bruce and further aligning their parallel journeys. The film also includes voiceover narration of Bruce writing letters to his deceased father, expressing his doubts, frustrations, and growing resolve to fight Gotham's corruption. In his early attempts at fighting crime, Bruce wears a makeshift costume made up of sports equipment. However, when his father's signet ring, which bears the initials TW, leaves a mark resembling a bat after Bruce punches a criminal, the media dub him Batman. Inspired by this and the fear it creates in his enemies, Bruce leans into this persona, modifying his costume to resemble a bat to strike terror in Gotham's underworld. In the film, Selena Kyle would have been an African-American prostitute, and dominatrix who works under the name Mistress Selena. As one of the first people Batman saves, she's inspired to later create her own costume, becoming Catwoman. While Bruce's desire to take action against Gotham's corruption are solidified after witnessing the abuse she faces. None of Batman's more eccentric villains are here, although there is a quick cameo of Joker at Arkham. Instead, the main villain of the film would have been Commissioner Loeb, who was in bed with the biggest names in Gotham's underworld, using his position of power to shield their activities while personally profiting from bribes from his deals, perpetuating the city's cycle of corruption and crime. As Batman and Gordon work to bring Loeb down, Loeb orders his crooked cops to kidnap Gordon's pregnant wife, leading to a tense standoff between them and Gordon, before Batman helps Gordon get her back as the two pin Loeb down. The film ends with Bruce finally reappearing after years living off the grid, claiming his fortune and moving back into Wayne Manor with little Al. So what went wrong? From the start, Warner Brothers and Aronofsky didn't seem to be on the same page. To play Batman, Aronofsky wanted to keep Phoenix. However, Warner Brothers wanted the clean-cut Freddie Prinze Jr., who starred in another WB film suit. Initially, Aronofsky was envisioning the film with an R rating, with brutal action and lots of violence. In an attempt to undermine the over-the-top and cheesy Batman and Robin, Warner Brothers, however, refused to greenlight it. They believed that limiting the film's box office potential with an R rating would unnecessarily limit its success. Similar issues had arisen with Batman Returns, which alienated a portion of its audience and directly influenced the shift toward the more family-friendly tone of Batman Forever. Frank Miller would later say one studio executive wanted to make a Batman he could take his kids to, and this wasn't bad. It didn't have the toys in it, it strayed away from the Batman mythos, and it was made for an adult audience. Aronofsky, however, would argue that Warner Brothers could do both and release a hardcore, adult-oriented version of Batman for adults that you could make for a small budget and shoot on Super 16, and then Warner Brothers could release a bigger budget PG one for kids. Regardless, while Aronofsky would say that Warner Brothers was very brave in allowing he and Frank Miller to develop it, and the two being very happy with the script, they also noted that the script that was delivered was exactly the way Aronofsky had originally pitched it to the studio. So Warner's response was confusing since they knew what was coming before they delivered it. And while later reboots like Batman Begins and Matt Reeves' The Batman would plunder Frank Miller's comic, had Aronofsky's gruesome, violent adaptation of it come out after Batman and Robin, it perhaps might have been too jarring a change in tone for audiences and failed to find the widespread success that Nolan's films ultimately achieved. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Bullets and Blockbusters for more great content.
There's definitely a fire going on in my neighborhood, or something smoky. I wonder if anyone else notices that, because I'm like far away from the street, looking for my garage, you know what I'm saying? That's my POV, so hoping people in actually on the street taking notice. Okay, I seen someone drive past. I noticed too. Alright. Let's see, what else? Oh, this is a good one too.
Wesley Snipes had played the Black Panther.
What if Wesley Snipes had played the Black Panther? I actually watched this before. I think it's very interesting.
What if Wesley Snipes had played the Black Panther in the 90s instead of Blade? Well, he almost did.
Wow.
What if Wesley Snipes had played the Black Panther in the 90s instead of Blade? Well, he almost did. Long before Chadwick Boseman brought T'Challa to life
Bullets
in the MCU,
and Blockbusters.
Marvel was trying to get a Black Panther movie
That's
off
what
the
the
ground
channel's
with Snipes in the lead. At one point, director John Singleton wanted to drop Wakanda altogether and reframe the Panther as a generational drama about the civil rights movement. Later, the studio tried to feature the character in a third Fantastic Four film, while eventual director Ryan Coogler tried to include compatriot. So how do we go from all of that to the movie we got? To find out, let's dive in and take a look at what could have been Black Panther. In the mid-90s, Marvel approached Wesley Snipes about starring in a big-screen adaptation of Black Panther. Snipes, by then, was quickly becoming one of Hollywood's hottest stars, fresh off hits like White Man Can't Jump and Demolition Man. He was drawn to the project because the character represented dignity, strength, and a rejection of the stereotypes often associated with Africa and the black community. In that era, black superhero films were typically played for laughs, like comedies Meteor Man and Blank Man, which made the idea of a serious big-budget adaptation stand out as something entirely different. Snipes admired how the character connected to the legacy of real African empires and royalty, like the Mali Empire under Mansa Musa, whose wealth rivaled that of today's richest figures. For Snipes, it was a chance to highlight a side of African history that mainstream audiences had rarely seen. He was also intrigued by the futuristic technology of Wakanda, seeing it as a forward-thinking vision of what African societies could represent.
You know what says one about Wesley
Back
Snipes?
then, Marvel was not producing its own
He was a
films,
pioneer for
meaning
Marvel,
they had to
man.
rely on outside studios to finance and produce them. Almost immediately, Hollywood executives misunderstood the pitch.
In his
Using
own
the
way,
project
in his
as a
own way, he
Black Panther
was.
political movement of the 1960s rather than a comic book superhero. This perception became a major hurdle in getting the film off the ground, but Columbia showed interest, so Snipes began the hunt for a director. For Snipes, choosing a black director felt essential. He believed that the film's subject matter demanded someone with a cultural understanding to bring authenticity to the story, just as Steven Spielberg drew on his Jewish heritage to make Schindler's List, and Martin Scorsese infused Goodfellas with the lived nuances of his Italian-American background. A different director could have done a technically competent job, but there were cultural layers that only someone within the community could fully capture. As Denzel Washington would say years later when asked why a black director had to direct Fences, we all know what it is when a hot comb hits your head on a Sunday morning, what it smells like. With that,
En este curso de doméstica aprenderás a usar Canva para diseñar plantillas que te facilitarán tu producción de contenidos en Instagram. Transforma tu feed de Instagram en el mejor de los escaparates para tu contenido.
in mind, Snipes first approached Mario Van Peebles, who had directed him in New Jack City, and around the same period would ironically
I think
go on
Van
to
Peebles
make
would've
Panther,
killed
a
that
film
shit.
about the Black Panther Party. He also reached out to John Singleton, fresh off Boys in the Hood. Singleton was interested, but his vision for Black Panther leaned in a different direction. Rather than embracing the Afro-futurist concept of Wakanda as a hidden, technologically advanced African nation, Singleton wanted to ground the story in the civil rights movement. His version envisioned T'Challa having the spirit of the Black Panther, trying to get his son to join the civil rights movement. This dynamic would have fueled the central conflict. A father striving to guide his son toward responsibility and political consciousness.
That could have been its
and a
own
son
movie.
determined to rebel, caught up in youthful defiance. The film would have been less about high-tech
Shout out to John Singleton, he's a mother legend. But what he was proposing, that could have been a whole different movie entirely. I mean, he didn't want to even, have it even deal with Marvel. That could have been a whole different movie entirely. I definitely think Van Peebles would have been the better choice.
heroics, and more about generational conflict, politics, and social activism. Snipes, however, balked at Singleton's vision, arguing that this approach stripped away the very elements that made the character unique in the Marvel Universe. For Snipes, the appeal of Black Panther was in showing a vision of Africa rarely seen on screen, wealthy, powerful, and scientifically advanced. He wanted audiences to experience Wakanda's glory, a breathtaking, futuristic civilization.
I'm gonna say this and be done with it. I feel like I said, Wesley Snipes has been an anchor, for Marvel. A lot of people don't like to really think about that. Them Blade movies kept, as Stan Lee said, Blade kept Marvel afloat. You know what I'm saying? It brought it up. You know what I'm saying? What's that saying with rising tides and boats? You know what I'm saying? But yeah, man, I think with him jumping on Blade after that, with Black Panther not coming to fruition, you could just tell he was just already, he was a visionary. And on top of that, he already had it in his mind, like, no, we don't need to see the stereotypical idea of what a lot of people already have in their heads about Africa and African countries. You know what I'm saying? People starving in huts and all that shit, all that bullshit. We need to see a Afrofuturistic Wakanda. And he was already there, man. He was already there.
Guide his son toward
Shout out to Wesley,
responsibility and
man.
political consciousness. and a son determined to rebel, caught up in youthful defiance. The film would have been less about high-tech heroics and more
Okay,
about
now the
generational
smoke's
conflict,
bellowing
politics, and
everywhere.
social activism. Snipes, however, balked at Singleton's vision, arguing that this approach stripped away the very elements that made the character unique in the Marvel Universe. For Snipes, the appeal of Black Panther was in showing a vision of Africa rarely seen on screen, wealthy, powerful, and scientifically advanced. He wanted audiences to experience Wakanda's glory, a breathtaking, futuristic civilization that defied the stereotypes Hollywood had long perpetuated about the continent. Singleton's vision may have been a powerful political drama, but Snipes believed the world needed to see the grandeur of Wakanda brought to life as a true superhero epic. Australian screenwriter Terry Hayes, who co-wrote the two Mad Max sequels, next delivered what Snipes later described as an unforgettable pitch for the movie. It opened with a sweeping battle sequence in Wakanda, climaxing with baby T'Challa placed in the city drift on a river to ensure his survival, like the story of Moses. The story then leapt forward in time, reintroducing T'Challa as an adult living far away from his homeland. His ordinary life would then be suddenly interrupted when he was ambushed in an elevator, leading into an intense, intricately choreographed fight in close quarters that would begin his journey, similar to the elevator scene in Captain America: Winter Soldier. From that point, the narrative would expand outward, tracing T'Challa's path back to Wakanda and his destiny as the Black Panther. Unfortunately, Snipes struggled to lock down the right pair of director and screenwriter, and in many ways, his vision was simply ahead of his time. The visual effects technology of the 90s wasn't
Super.
advanced enough to convincingly bring Wakanda's futuristic world to life.
Super duper ahead of his time. All right, I'm